Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint Deadwalker Zombies. If you'd like to support the channel, our Ko-fi and Patreon page are linked below. Now on to the video. The first colour I'm going to use is the Rakarth Flesh. I'm going to use this to paint all of the zombie's skin and also the scroll, which is hanging from the little post on top of his back there. Now, because all the Deadwalker Zombies are slightly different, it may be that you're painting on one that hasn't got all the same bits as this, or different bits, but you'll be able to apply the same techniques to those. So for example, if they've got like a shovel or some sort of weapon with a blade, you can use the same method of corroding the metal effect that we're going to be using on the padlocks and the little bits of metal on top of the coffin. Next up, we've got Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm going to use this to paint the inside of the mouth, around the eyes and all the open wounds. I'm going to say the top of the coffin, and I'm assuming that's what the wooden parts are that he's got staked through his chest. Now I'm not going to be doing too much gore on this fellow because he's had long enough for roots and a small tree to grow through him. I'm expecting that his blood would probably dry as a crisp there, and from what I was reading online, that would very much be the case. So now we're going to go on to Citadel Dryad Bark. I'm going to use this to do the stakes that are going through him and also the tree stump. So there's not going to be too much gore on this fellow. If I'm doing some of the other Deadwalkers at a later point, sort of like the ones that are carrying shovels or that kind of thing, then I probably would add a bit of gore to them, because they look slightly fresher, or they could be slightly fresher than this chap who's obviously been under the ground for some time to have all those roots growing through him. Next up, we're going to use Citadel Balor Brown. I'm going to use this to paint the roots. Now, while I was painting this guy, I kept going across more and more roots on him. There's one going across the top of his right leg, also going through the bottom of the boards and into his neck, possibly around his neck. Also the one that sort of snakes down from underneath the board, under his arm, and is poking out the bottom of those boards and planks at the back there. So when you're painting up these ones, just have a check around. There are some that are quite easily missed until you start painting everything up, and then you realise that it's not maybe a bit of innards or something like that sticking out, it is just another root. So now I'm going to use some Citadel Zandry Dust. I'm going to use this to paint the noose which is around his neck. Now it's quite a very plain palette that I'm using on this. There isn't really any bright colours or anything like that. The only ones I've really used is the red, and then there's going to be a little touch of green on the grass at the top there, but other than that it's all going to be quite drab colours because he's been in the ground for quite some time. Just going to use a little bit of Citadel Tallarn sand. I'm going to use this to paint the planks on the top there. There's a bit of bad footage of me painting up the planks that you couldn't see, so I've cut that bit and added a little bit more. What we're doing is painting all the planks on his back with Citadel Tallarn sand, and then we can do some nice wood effects on there, which I will link up a video of how to paint those wood effects when we get to that point. Also, I'll link up a zombie skin video as well. I've done two different styles that are different to the one on this video, so when we come to painting up the skin on this one, I'll link up the different ones too. Now it's going to be a bit of Citadel Leadbelcher. I'm going to use this on the padlocks and the chains, and there's also some metal bands going across those planks, presumably holding them all together. So we're just going to give them a coat of this too. Now for some Citadel Waaagh flesh, I'm going to use this on the grass which is growing out the soil on the top there. This is really quite funny miniatures. Been staked to the ground to keep them there, and they've got up anyway and just carrying everything else with them. Must be quite strong necromantic magic to have them staggering around with a gravestone on the back like, but Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Mournfang brown to paint up the soil on the back of the planks. Like so. Now I'm just going to use a little bit of Citadel Baneblade brown. This is to paint his belt. You can see part of this, it's going around underneath his waist. It gets hidden by the roots growing through there. Now I'm going to use Dawnstone as the final layer. I'm going to use this to paint the remains of his trousers. So you can give that a nice smooth coat of Dawnstone. We can start with the shades. The first shade is going to be Citadel Nuln Oil. I'm going to use this to paint up all of the metallics, the Dryad bark, so the stakes in the tree, and also the grey trousers. As always, I think this is a great part of painting when you add the shades to it. It really brings out those details so you can see everything standing out. Now I'm going to use a little bit of snakebite leather contrast from Citadel, and this is just to paint his belt. Then Citadel Athonian Camoshade, we're going to use this on his skin. Now you don't want to do a massive thick layer of this because you don't want pools of green on him. So you want to give it a reasonable coating so that you get the shade in the recesses without it pooling and going too dark. If it does pool and go too dark, it's not too much of a worry. But if you can just get it so it's just kind of making the Rakarth flesh a little bit off colour, and when you come back to repaint that skin, that will look a little bit sickly. I'll link up another two varieties of skin that you can put on here. So you've got Citadel Seraphim Sepia next. I'm going to use this to paint the scroll on the back there. Now Citadel Carroburg Crimson, we're going to use this to paint all of the wounds on him, all the little open sections in his skin. Slightly off camera there, sorry about that. Now we're going to use some Balor brown and start reapplying colour to the roots. Also using a little bit of this to edge along the belt there, because it does give a nice worn look to the edge of leather belt when you've done Baneblade brown, snakebite leather, and then the Balor brown just to add that edge to it. Does give it a nice worn leather look. So with the initial coat of Balor brown done, we're now going to add some Vallejo White to the Balor brown, and we're just going to highlight those roots. So keeping the light on the lumps and the bumps, leaving the Balor brown and also the shade in the recesses and in the slightly underside areas. So as I go along here, you'll notice that I spot little roots every now and again as I'm painting up other things, and then next time it comes on you'll spot that that root is there. Now we're going to go to Citadel Rakarth Flesh and we're going to start working on the skin again. So we're just going to be applying this back to the skin, making sure that you leave some of the Athonian Camoshade in the recesses. When you're reapplying it, think about where the light's going to be catching, so under those bits on the ankle where the joint is and it sticks out a bit, you can have a bit of shade under there, and shade underneath any parts of like the underside of arms and things like that. So the first layer done, we're going to mix in a little bit of Citadel Deepkin Flesh. We're going to start highlighting the skin. The reason I use the Deepkin Flesh is because it highlights it and adds this slight tint blue or green. It just gives it a really kind of sick or dead look to it. Do something very similar for Blight Kings and things like that, or Nurgle characters, because it does give that kind of diseased and rotten look to them. So now adding a little bit more Deepkin Flesh to the previous mix, I'm going to do another layer of highlights on the skin. So this layer you just want to be picking out the details around the edges of the wounds, any top surfaces or any little details that you want to put on. You can use this layer to bring out loads and loads of detail on the figure. Next up, a little bit of Citadel Rakarth Flesh. I'm going to use this to paint on the bones, so you've got the bones showing through in his arm there and the ribs. I think on pretty much all the zombies there's bits of bone showing through them. There's also a few little bits on his scalp as well that you can add in there. I'll use this to do his teeth. I actually do the teeth a little bit later on off camera, but you can use it to do the teeth now if you want to. So now I'm going to use some Vallejo White. I'm going to start doing his eyes. So as always, I'm going to use the Army Painter Wargamer character brush. Going to get a little bit of that white on. You can't really see it there, but I'm dragging the paintbrush from the inside of the eye near the nose and dragging it outwards to get those white of the eyes done. I'm going to use a tiny spot of Vallejo Black and the same brush to put those pupils in there. I'll link up a video of how to do eyes here too. That just shows the principle about dragging the brush from the inside of the face to the outside. Like so. So now we're going on to Citadel Zandry Dust. We're going to start reapplying the colour to the noose. I'm using the Army Painter Wargamer character brush again here. And all I'm doing is going lengthways, following each of those little ridges in the noose to bring the detail out. There's lots of these to do, but it's worth going around and putting them all on because it does look really good once it's finished. Now going on to the Dryad bark, we're going to start working on those stakes and the tree stump. So you're going to leave the shade in the recesses. Add the paint to any of the lumps and bumps on the bark, whilst trying to avoid any of the areas that are recessed or the grooves within the wood. Like so. Now we're going to use some Citadel Balor Brown, mix it with the Dryad bark. We're just going to start adding a highlight to all of the areas you just reapplied the Dryad bark to. There's plenty of little notches and bumps on these bits of tree or on the wooden stakes going through. And it's those sections that you want to be highlighting here, so you're leaving areas of the Dryad bark and also areas of the recesses still shaded. But a little bit of extra footage here with the lighting improved a little bit because the last part came out quite dark, so you couldn't quite see what was being added. But I think you can see it a little bit better on this. Going to add a little bit more Balor brown to the previous mix. We're just going to give one final highlight. Going to be using the Army Painter Wargamer Carrot brush here again, just so we can get that nice thin bit of detail on the areas that you're highlighting, so you're not just putting too many thick layers on there. Using all these layers to practice how I'm going to be painting up Treebeard at some point in the future too, because it's a figure that I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to set about that yet. Next up, Citadel Tallarn Sand. I'm going to start reapplying colour to the planks. Now I'm using the Wargamer character brush again here. I'm just doing lots of lines, putting the grain on the wood. It doesn't show up entirely as well as I'd like here, but with a few little highlights, and then going back over it with some of the shades as well, different shades to give that wood a nice effect later on. You'll have that nice tarnished wood effect that you may have seen on the How to Paint Wood video, which I'll link up here. Now we're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Mournfang brown. I'm going to start re-highlighting or recolouring the soil. And because it's a lot more smooth, the detail on the soil, I'm just kind of poking on the Mournfang brown rather than doing smooth brush strokes, just gently kind of poking it onto some parts rather than leaving some of the other bits with the shades on. Now I'm going to mix a bit of Balor brown with the Mournfang brown. We're just going to, same again, just spot on the highlights, just to give it that little bit of texture, that bit of detail, but without going too over the top on it, because it's a Deadwalker, it's probably not going to be that points heavy, and you're going to be painting a lot of them. Next up, a little bit of Citadel Waaagh Flesh. We're just going to use this to reapply the base colour back to the grass that's growing on his back. Now we're going to mix a little bit of Moot green with the Waaagh Flesh. We are going to be highlighting probably about the top 2/3 of each of these bits of grass. Adding a little bit more Moot green now. I'm just going to do about the top 1/3 of the grass. Like so. Now we're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Rakarth Flesh, which I'm not going to show here. And we're going to reapply colour to the scroll that's hanging from the little stake at the back here. Because I want it to look a bit old and weathered, I'm not doing smooth painting on this, it's just kind of very slapdash and a bit here and there, so you get some highlighted areas where you're going to get the highlights on the scroll, but even that's a bit patchy, and the flatter areas where it's just going to be the flat colour usually is a little bit patchy too, because I don't want it to be completely smooth. So now we're going to add some Vallejo White to the Rakarth Flesh. We're going to start highlighting the scroll in the same way. Again, I'm just doing the kind of patchy highlighting. It's very much kind of like almost scribbling with the brush, rather than doing those nice smooth strokes, and that's just to give it that rough, textured look. Like so. Now we're going to add a little bit more Vallejo White to the previous mix. I'm going to start doing the final highlights, which are more like edge highlights on this. So the underside of any ridges, or cuts in it, and the top of any crests and bumps in the actual scroll itself. Like so. Now we're going to work on his trousers. We're going to use a little bit of Citadel Dawnstone. Going to reapply the colour to these trousers and leave the shade in the recesses. So again, with these you can show a nice bit of shading and highlighting by not reapplying the colour evenly all over. You want to leave some of that shade, a bit more shade on the underside of his trousers there, so it's not getting the base colour reapplied. You'll see how when I've done this, it does look quite nicely highlighted with very, very little effort. So we're going to add a tiny little bit of white to the Dawnstone. We're just going to start highlighting those trousers now. Mainly just highlighting the top edges and top surfaces just to give them a little bit of colour. Now we're going to add a little tiny bit more white to the previous mix and just give them one final highlight. Now we're going to use some Citadel Carroburg Crimson. I'm going to use this to do some writing on the scroll work. I'll link up a video of how to do scroll work here in case you want to put something different on it. Like so. Now going with a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade. I'm going to start working on the metal parts here. So giving them a coat of Agrax Earthshade just to give them that rough and weathered look. Now I'm going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel Seraphim Sepia. We're just going to use this on the metal parts as well, just to give them that orangey rusty look. Now I'm not going to go over the top with these. I'm not going to start adding typhus corrosion and that kind of stuff to give it too much rust. I just wanted it to look a little bit discoloured, because I think that'll take it away from the rest of the miniature. Just going to use a tiny little spot of Leadbelcher here to paint this bolt which is holding on the scroll, or the nail that's holding on the scroll. It's poking out the back of the stake too, so you want to make sure you paint the other side of that as well. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Reikland Fleshshade. What I'm going to use this for is to go between the planks, or the grains on the planks, and just darken them up a little bit in certain areas, just to make them stand out a little bit more. Because where the Tallarn sand didn't really bring out the colour as much as I'd like it to, if we add these on, it does put the grain of the wood in there and make them stand out a lot more. Now I'm going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel Athonian Camoshade. I'm just going to put some of this around the top ends. I was applying this really bit by bit with a small layer brush, but then changed to a medium layer brush so I can add a little bit more. I'm putting this towards the ends of the wood and things like that because that's where the damp will get into it a lot more. I'll link up a video on how to paint that as well. Now we are using a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade, and what we're doing here is we are just darkening up some more of those little areas at the end of the planks where there's little cuts into the planks and things like that, just to darken them up and make them look a little bit more rotten and damp. like so. And that is the finished Deadwalker. Really pleased with how he turned out. I'll link up to a couple of the videos as I said earlier on. I'll put links for them in the description below. But really pleased with how he turned out. Look forward to painting some more of them. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media, linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and you enjoy the content and you'd like to support us, our Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Thanks very much.